Like the internship is like you found is very useful. Would it be useful to have the teacher as part of that process as well? Because like generally, if you're doing an internship, you're kind of plopped into a company and then you're basically reporting back. Would it be more ideal to have a teacher able to help the student as well as kind of getting feedback from the business?
I think a teacher should come by the office like every 4 weeks or whatever, and also the intern should be able to message or call the teacher like, hey, I'm stuck here, what would you do there, like that kind of stuff. I wouldn't just we are kind of live now is what I always wanted to say. We are live.
We're officially live.
We are officially live, exactly. I mean, this is just an experiment.
Hey, Mr. Nick.
hey, Mr. Tyler.
I thought I'd try a new nickname for you.
Well, Mr. Nick, that's very creative. So I'm very impressed by your design problem-solving skills.
Well, I went deep into my creative bag and pulled that one out. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to call you Mr. White, but then we would be in a different field, I guess.
That's good.
Producing different things.
I don't mind it.
Okay. I mean, we can make a career switch if this doesn't turn out. Like if we fail at being a designer, we can rent an RV, and I'll call you Mr. White, and we will do different things.
Okay. We can tour. Just go on a giant road trip with our van.
Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about design education today.
Okay.
And how people enter this field, or what they do when they want to enter this field. I'm very curious to hear if the thing that I'm going to say, if it resonates with you, if you've seen the same thing or not at all. And then we can take it from there. And the thing I want to say is a common remark people make when I do coaching and mentoring. I always ask, like, okay, you want to be a UX designer or a product designer or do something with users, and why is that? And then they always tell me, like, well, I want to help people. I want to have happy users and do good for the world and improve all the things you do, better experience, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's great. First of all, I think it's very, it's a good thing to aim for. But then I also look at my career so far, where I've been mostly working in, large corporations, governments, banks, really large profit first type organizations. And I feel like there's a big gap between that very motivating thing people tell me, like, I want to do good for the world, I want to make users happy, versus the thing that happens on the job, on your day-to-day job, where it's mostly about how can we move as many users as we can towards the buy button, the subscribe button. It's a gap I'm noticing, and I can't help but feel a bit sad that they will hit that wall at some point.
True. But I think that's with any career choice, I imagine. Like if you're jumping into being a doctor, well, that's probably a terrible example. You're constantly helping people, but there's jobs where you graduate from school or you take your bootcamp and then you're bushy-eyed, bright-tailed, whatever the term is, and you're ready to help your users, to your point. But at the end of the day, I think when you're coming out of school, you're probably over-indexed on the helping users portion, but we're forgetting that if the business doesn't make money, you can't help them. So at the end of the day, like the business needs to run. Yes, you need to have people hit that subscribe button, but if the business doesn't have any revenue, then you're not going to be able to help the users. So that's the balance. The percentage that depends and varies from company to company, but very true. Yeah, it's not about helping users, it's also about helping the business as well.
Do you think less people would go into design if they knew more about what it's actually like?
I don't think so. You can challenge me if you disagree. Mm-hmm. I think it depends how it's being sold. So like if it was sold like, hey, you can take a business and help it grow, at the same time help its users, I think there's a story or a narrative there that you can kind of tell that'll be as attractive to that person. I don't think we're too naive as people to think like, oh, my work is just helping people all day. Like maybe that's how it was pitched and that's why they're disillusioned in that way. But I think if it was painted in the correct or like in a more realistic way, to your point, the transition from like school to on the job might be a bit more smoother. Curious what you think.
I think that maybe I've been in corporations for too long, because I just last week during my vacation I went to a theme park and they had a companion app you can use while there on your phone,
Mm-hmm.
where it tells you about queue times at different rides, and your tickets were there, and you can ask all these questions. And I think that being a designer for that theme park, working on the app, that would be about making people happy, but also making the theme park more money, because when the user is happy, they're more likely to stick around a bit longer, go to a food stand in the theme park rather than going home. So in that way, I think you're right. Like there are, I think, places where you can do both, make users super happy and have them spend more money. But I also think that maybe those projects are less common compared to just another dashboard, just another government thing you have to make. Because I remember my corporate days, like we were with 50 designers, including myself. And when you ask any one of those designers, like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, well, I want to work for McDonald's, or I want to work for, Coca-Cola, like one of the big brands. But only like 2 or 3 people were doing that. Like the other 40 plus designers were all doing something for a Dutch ministry or a Dutch bank or, IRS in the Netherlands. That type of project, very like dusty, slow project. So maybe that's the thing. Like maybe someone wanting to go into design they should be prepared that the fun projects you see online, that they aren't always the default. Like it's likely that you will do something else too.
Hmm. And then I would maybe ask you, like, from the people that you were kind of speaking to, like, why specifically design? Like, you can also do development per se or project management.
Yeah.
Each one affects the user, like, regardless. So why specifically design? I guess is the first question.
Most of them, if I remember correctly, most of them were also interested in the psychology part of design, color theory and certain moods you can create and how it interacts with your experience as a whole. I also think, but I'm more guessing, I also think that a non-technical person looking at a development role, I think that the learning curve is way steeper compared to going from marketing to design, where you go from non-technical to non-technical. Yeah, but that's what I'm thinking. Perhaps the non-technical part mostly.
Well, that's fair. But also, if you're a project manager, it's probably the least technical. If you're wanting to transition, design, there's like, to your point, there's color theory and then learning the tools, and then even more technical that the engineering counterpart. I guess there's probably an allure of like the designer, UX designer.
Yeah.
Yeah. With all the fancy tools that we have.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like, because I'm, for this episode, I just threw in a random thought that I had, like, a pattern I thought I was seeing. So I have to fine tune and figure out what I think and if there's something there. So that's something we're actually brainstorming right now, this episode. So that's probably quite cool, I would say. I'm just curious if that gap is actually there, the things you learn in school versus the things you do on the job. Because I'm already thinking about what you said in the beginning. Is that something that's unique for design, yes or no? And then regardless of the answer to that question, then the second question would be, does it matter? Like, is it a problem? Isn't that always going to be the case? Like, is it okay that you learn something and that things are a bit different? I don't think so per se, but the gap can be too big, I think.
I'm thinking, like, I'm trying to see if I can counter the initial argument. Like, does it matter? Like, if you look at the landscape of like what the makeup of a company is, would you think that like the designer is the one that's more concerned with the user by and large? Like everyone is, but like, first question, do you think the designer is more empathetic to the end user as like a position?
I think a designer is trained to be that way.
Yeah. So I think maybe it could be a good thing that we over index on like making sure that our users are happy, because let's say you started in the middle. Let's say like I want to make sure that that I'm only focused on the users versus I'm only focused on the business. If we over index on the user at the beginning and then we get jaded and disillusioned, then it slowly moves over, but you never lose that base of, okay, user first, even though we're learning on the job, that the company needs to be there as well. Maybe that's not a bad thing. That could be the counter argument.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I see something there. I think you're probably right about that. It's to be expected that the things you learn in school is very much about theory, and then you go do a job, and every company is slightly different. So with that in mind, it's probably impossible to expect that the things you learn and the things you do align perfectly.
Yeah, then I guess it brings up the question is what should you be learning in school, and like what versus like what you'll be learning on the job. Because like we learn like the majority of it on the job. Like plus also it depends on what industry you're jumping into. Like if you're in fintech versus the government versus e-commerce versus wealth tech, whatever it is, like the things you like, yes, the job is designer, but what you're doing on the day-to-day basis is vastly different and also specific to the industry you're working in. So I don't think you can be trained to like learn an industry as like the second layer of like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Do you also think that first layer is different compared to for each industry? I think that's something you mentioned.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, because we have the like what we learn in school is like the process, right? So like you do some discovery, you do some research, interviews, like the standard like 5-step design process.
Yeah.
That also is the idealized version of what that design process looks like. You probably know, like I do, like that is never a consistent framework that exists with any company. Like depending on how fast the company is, depending on like the structure, you're never following, and how much time you have to work on a particular project. You're never doing everything by the book, I guess to say. So probably yes, like in the first layer you're learning the principles, but then it's learning like when you're on the job, it's learning how to adapt the process to make the most sense for where you are. And the type of company that you're working at.
Well, that's something I think that should be mentioned at least in your typical design education program. Whether it being a university or a boot camp or something in between. I didn't hear that in school. Like I know 10 years ago, I was your typical design graduate, like very happy and my backpack full of ideals and dreams, and running into my first job and hitting a wall on the first day, basically. Because I remember my manager looking at my notes of the day, and then he picked my piece of paper up and he wrapped it into a ball and he threw it away, and he told me like, that's not what we do here. Yeah. And like that really was a smack in the face, figuratively speaking, of course, but still it waked me up like, but I thought this was the way to do it. Which it turns out it wasn't.
No, it never is. What's a big realization you learn? Like, I don't know how it was for you in school, but like the example projects or like the things that you work on to kind of build up your portfolio, it was always 0 to 1. So like a brand new idea, like this will change the world. Let's say you work on this new app that'll help. It's a new dating app or a new professional or like a new finance app. It's always 0 to 1. But what I never learned in school was what's the majority of the case is joining a company that's already been in existence for at least like 2-3 years. And having to design with the constraint of what's already there. And what I mean by that is like there's already something designed, there's a framework involved. The engineering team has a certain tech stack they're working with. There's tech debt, which just means like things were built super quickly to get to revenue. So we're hacking our way to like a version or the MVP, and it wasn't built in the ideal way. So you're having to kind of communicate with like the different stakeholders and engineering, like, okay, we want to build this new feature, but there's some constraints in the way versus let me just put in my dream version of what this app might be, and then we'll build it.
Yeah. That's I think 1,000% the case. That's really, really so. I don't think I ever worked on something from scratch at all. in any of my employment days, but also not in my freelancing days. The closest I've been is where I would join a startup as the first designer and the only designer, and then they already had some sort of hacky first version, like a zero point 0.1 version made and designed by the founders, and then even if they didn't have that, if they did even if they didn't have the dashboard, like that first little thing, then still there's an idea and the tech stack they already chose,
Mm-hmm.
and constraints put on by the founders. Like, we want to have this done by the end of the month, by the end of the year. So the zero just doesn't exist unless you found something yourself. And by the way, it sounds fun, the 0 to 1 work, but I think it's even harder than 1 to 100 work. Because if there's nothing there, like, everything is possible, and that's super tough. Like, you will have
Mm-hmm.
a empty piece of paper syndrome. I'm not sure what the right word is, but you're just staring at your screen. It's empty and everything's possible. And then you freeze.
Yeah. Plus, if you're not the founder, that is the designer, you're like, how close are you to the initial problem of why the company was created in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point. One of my favorite clients was talking about, like, the difference between, like, 0 to 1 and then 1 to 100 for a designer, or basically anyone involved with that project, is that once you hit the 1, like, everything before, you can just experiment and break things and have your startup mentality and do everything by the book. But then once you hit the 1 and go beyond, so you have users, you have revenue, from that point moving forward, it's super scary, because anything you change might make the product better. You
Yeah.
might make more money, but you might also break something, and that will cost you revenue, cost you users, like higher churn rate, maybe even branding damage. If it's like a real big miss that you're making. So that puts pressure on you, but also your stakeholder management will be very different, because you have to convince a founder who has way more to lose than you to make this change. And it's likely going to result in you being able to make smaller changes
Mm.
instead of a few big changes. And that's something, a founder had to tell me, but I also had to find it out by doing. And that brings us, I think, a little bit full circle again to what you said earlier. Like, that's something you can only learn by doing. That's not something you
Mm.
can learn in school.
Yeah. On that point, do you think, like, as we're kind of talking about the things that you learn on the job versus what you learn in school, if you were to given like a magic wand and then to create your own school to kind of prepare designers for life in the job market, I think we've said a couple of things that might kind of give a better training to those people going into the job market. So it's like, yes, the craft, learning the tools, learning design, but also, like, is there value in kind of having like fake clients, working on in a situation where we curate it in a way where it's like it's an existing project that already exists, and you have to speak to the different stakeholders, like the CEO, the marketing person, the engineer, to make sure that what you're suggesting actually might get approved and move forward. Like, is there a better way that we can curate like the educational system to better prepare for the next step?
I have lots of thoughts there, while being aware that all of the things I'm going to say, there are some very difficult ones there, some that will be time consuming, expensive, perhaps a bit dreamy. I'm just going to ramble through my list.
Please.
It's unprepared list, so I'm just going to mention what comes up, and then you can poke holes in it. You can say, "Hey, Nick, that doesn't make any sense," or have your counterpoint. But I think that the best thing to do is to have more real life involvement. So I did a 4-year design education. I did 2 internships during those 4 years. Both were, I think, like 15 or 16 weeks total. So just
Mm-hmm.
over a quarter. I would like to see that doubled. I would do way more internships, because I remember doing my first internship. After the first month, I was like, wow, I've learned X, like 10 times as much in these first few weeks compared to the 2 years prior in school. Like, it was a big eye opener. challenge there being that you have to find the right company. There need to be enough companies willing to, invest into an intern, because the
Mm.
intern requires time. It's probably not going to do the best job. So a senior has to correct the work, and so that's expensive, but very useful, because then you also, as an intern, you have a way in for after school, perhaps to get hired. So that's one thing. I would like the teachers in school to be actual design professionals. I remember from my school days, we had a lot of university professors who were just, washed out professionals. Like, they didn't want to do the job anymore. So then they go to teach, and then they mostly talk about their achievements from the 90s. It's not really like they've been out of the field for so long that the credibility isn't as good as you want it to be.
Mm.
And then, just to continue this, I would also add more, guest speakers if possible.
Mm.
Actual designers. I would actually did host like a 90-minute presentation or a workshop for a school, like I think 2 or 3 years ago, just to tell them about my experience on the job. I think it's lots of fun to do. And that would be very helpful.
Yeah, that sounds like. Would you like, based on what you just said, on like your most recent and the last point, like the internship is like you found was very useful. Would it be useful to have the teacher as part of that process as well? Because like generally, if you're doing an internship, you're kind of plopped into a company, and then you're managed by the people in the company, and then you're basically reporting back. Like, would it be more ideal to have a teacher able to kind of help the student as well as kind of getting feedback from the business as well?
Yeah, I think that should be a three-way or three-party situation. I think the teacher should come by the office like every 4 weeks or whatever, and also the intern should be able to message or call the teacher. Like, hey, I'm stuck here. What would you do there? Like that kind of stuff. I wouldn't just send the student on their way and then good luck and goodbye and see you in 6 months. I don't think that's the way. Also, because you have to check that the company isn't just abusing the intern as a form of cheap labor. So yeah, I would involve the teacher. So that's all about, like, all the things I mentioned. It's all about connecting school to the real world, but then also in
Yes.
school itself. In the first 3 months of my education, and we're talking about 2011. Now, I did school from 2011 until 2015. I had Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign in the first quarter. And then in the second quarter, we did HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And those 6 months were the only months where we actually learned a tool or a framework. And I think that's a good thing. Like, I don't think it's important. Well, a little bit, 3 or 6 months of Figma education or cursor education, depending on the direction you're going into, is enough. And I would then say that everything you learn or everything you spend time on after those first few months is all about how to run a project, how to sell your decisions, all that kind of stuff that we talked about in many episodes already.
I think that's a good point. Like the connection between, like you had mentioned, like the connection between the school and the real world. Like, I think it's very easy for a school to kind of have a curriculum and then it become outdated, especially now since like things are changing rather quickly. But if they were like integrated into the establishment that their students were interning at, they'd get that feedback loop there, I think. And then they get like, okay, here's what our students are actually doing. Let us like update our curriculum to make it more reflective of what they're actually going to be jumping into.
Do you have any thoughts why that outdatedness is there?
I think it probably requires a lot of work. Like it's not like like school is like a constantly evolving thing. Like it's not like you're selling a product, then you can build it once and then you keep selling it. It's you're when you're a school, you're selling education that's constantly evolving with like the times and the industries that and as industries evolve as well. If you're in an ideal world, your curriculum should change every year. Like you should have what's working now, and then so let's say you kick off the year, you have your students or like depending on how long the program is. But let's say it was a year program. So you kick off the year, you have your curriculum, and then at the end they're doing their internships, and then you're gathering information of what they're doing on the job, and then it's like a feedback loop to what you're being taught. So you're constantly at least being relatively up to date with what you're teaching your students. Versus if you don't have that connection point, so if you don't have, to your point, speakers coming to school talking about what's happening in the real world, getting reports from where students are interning at, you're just going to have this siloed enterprise where it's guessing what's happening in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. So then it actually has multiple benefits. The being connected to the real world, it's useful for students, but also for the teachers to stay in the loop.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like they're going to be, the teachers as well are going to be held accountable, I think, a bit more, because if they're connected to to the business via their student, and if they're teaching their student something and they're getting constant pushback from from their employer, then there's obvious, there's a tell there, there's a signal that what they're telling the student is incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, they need to adjust something there.
It also makes me think about like when you are a researcher in a university at a certain level, I think you're required to also teach.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that on TV. I'm not even sure if it's the case in real life, but I think I've seen that somewhere where you, like, if you are you're researching 4 days a week, then the 5th day you have to give a class, maybe a teacher to, some of the students in school. Perhaps that should be the other way around for teachers, design teachers. So when you are teaching full time, you're required to do a project, any type of project, once every quarter or once every school year.
Oh, that's a good one.
Just some boots on the ground type thing. So just that you're aware of the things that are happening outside of your classroom.
That's actually a really good idea, because that's what like dentists do anyways. When dentists are they graduate and they have a certificate, they have to keep up with their what's evolving in the industry. So it's not like they're just, they have their practice, they continue. They have to go to conferences, they have to do certain things. So that's a really
interesting.
That's a really good point, to keep them up to date as well. And then on the same lines, I think it'd be super valuable for because teaching what helps you learn as well, right? So I think for the students, so let's say in your case you had a 4-year program or a 3-year program, you can have the students teach. If they graduate and go to the 2nd year, they can teach what they've learned to the 1st year. So it kind of concretizes what they've learned.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So there's a constant feedback loop from the teachers, to your point, and then also from the students as well.
Yeah. They didn't call me, my university. They haven't called me in the 10 years since graduation. It's also interesting to see that if I look at my year in school, like everyone who's graduated, lots and lots of people are doing something completely different now. And I don't want to say that it's a design thing, but I think just in general, like my father has worked for 33 years at the same company. He still is. But I think our generation, we're more or less the same age, same phase of our life, I would say. I think for our generation, it's job hopping, but even career hopping is far more common. Not sure where I'm going with this, but just something I noticed. When you look at design graduates, I'm one of the last few people from the 2015 class that's still designing.
And is it that they're switching to completely different careers, or is it they're just starting their own companies? Because that's
different things, out of design, and out of tech even.
Because I was going to push for the clear transition. There's a clear transition path from designer to founder, or to doesn't have to be in tech. Like if you wanted to start the skills you learn on a day-to-day basis being a designer transfer very well to a business owner, even if it's outside of tech in general.
Yeah. Well,
but to your point,
I knew someone, for example, my education, by the way, it was very, very broad. We did design, marketing, and programming all in one. And then halfway through, you pick a direction. So I went the design direction. Someone else I knew went the marketing direction, and now they work in construction, and then not marketing for a construction company, actual construction work.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's a big jump. Like that's what I said earlier. I really meant like they are really out of the field, like not a natural progression, just complete 180-degree turn going somewhere else.
That's fair. It reminds me of someone, a developer I used to work with now owns the show American Ninja Warriors, where there's like a giant obstacle course. So someone was a senior developer and then started a Ninja Warrior training company.
Yeah, that's great.
So not a designer, but like still a transition. Mm-hmm. Though there's probably, maybe I'm blind to it, there's probably there's still, regardless, I think there's still skills that you can transfer from one to the other, I imagine, because you're having a different perspective of how another industry or companies work. And then you're seeing how the existing industry and the new industry you've hopped to works. Maybe there's optimizations there.
Yeah.
I'd imagine. Unless you're transitioning from a designer to bricklayer. I don't know. There's only so much that can be transferred in that case.
Yeah. Well, let's call it, office work. Stuff you do on a chair and in a conference room. I think if you are a successful designer, you can be a successful marketer too, or a recruiter or a founder, just because you understand how any project works. Like, I think sometimes we are also making things too hard on ourselves by saying like, we have this unique way of doing design, 5 steps, double diamond, all these kind of, diagrams. But basically it's just understanding a problem, coming up with an idea, and validation / selling that idea. And then on repeat.
It made me think of, I just had an idea, on the lines of how we would curate the educational space. What if the tuition, or the majority of the tuition, was sent to one individual? So it's basically like a mentoring program, but you'd be paired from the school. So okay, I'm not going to teach you anything. I'm just going to pair you with this person who works at a company. You're going to be his intern. The benefit to the person or the business is that we're paying you to help the student, and they get to learn directly from that person.
Yeah.
So it's almost like school was a matchmaking service, or in that kind of way, where it's like, okay, my job is to find you a mentor in an industry that you potentially want to work in, and you're going to learn everything from that person who's working on the job. And then you're essentially paying to it's basically the same business model as a coach, but it's for a longer period of time and it's more thought through.
Is it combined with any type of return to school days where you have some theory, or is it all just the matchmaking?
It could be I'm thinking like a 70-30 split. So there are some, I think the 30 would be in school theory. So maybe you can ramp them up with the theory in that 30% bucket, and then the rest is just matching them. Okay, I'm just going to give you what you need as a baseline, and then I'm going to match you with this industry professional, and then they're going to carry the load, just because you're going to be embedded into the business immediately.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that would be very helpful. And then I think the responsibility of the school is curation. We're not just going to pair you with any type of company. Company has to be checked for design maturity and willingness to invest time into a student.
And also, and part of that would probably be being very thoughtful from the student's perspective, is what industry or type of work would you like to do? So I would love to be a designer in, I don't know, for Facebook, whatever, or some kind of social media app. You choose that, and then we'll find you a social media company where you can be mentored by someone who works directly in that company.
Yeah, nice. I think that's a good one, because that will also solve one of the big problems that I encounter, reading online, but also speaking to people. If I summarize this common problem that I hear, it's always, I've done this thing, with this thing being, completing a bootcamp or creating my first personal project. Now what? And then the secondary question being, did I do this right so far?
Hmm.
And what's next? Like, I think that's
Yeah.
the summary. And then they come to me looking for a mentor or a coach to help them, to basically guide them into the right direction. Like, okay,
Mm.
you've done this thing, ask the right questions. What did you like? What didn't you like? What did you struggle with? Okay, well, based on my experience and the things you just told me, I think your next step should be, this
Yeah.
thing. That would be solved if you are, like you're saying with your idea, if you're connected to someone on the job, because you can
Yeah.
always ask them those questions, because that's basically what they're there for. Like, they have their real life experience. You can shadow them on the job. So yeah, that makes me very enthusiastic about that idea.
Yeah.
University matchmaking service.
I think I was trying to poke holes in it. Well, I think one problem, but that might be solved. I have a problem and solution. So one problem that I'm seeing also from people that I mentor is that they're in situations where I'm mentoring them on how to like navigate the current place that they're working at, like how to level up. But when in one instance, I discovered that the place the person works at is, lack of a better word, not ideal. So they're not doing things correctly, regardless of how that looks like. So in a situation like that, where I don't know, they're not doing they're not doing any research whatsoever. It's just like CEO to designer, go build and then ship, no validation. Let's say, or some kind of more egregious version of that. If the school finds that that's the case, they could be the accountability layer. It's like, okay, you're not learning what you should be learning. Let me find you another company. So there's like accountability from both ends. So it's not like, hey, I'm the mentor, I'm getting paid to teach the student. I'm also being held accountable by the education to protect the student, so that there's a happy ecosystem there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
Because
that's true.
that's
That's the risk. As a university or as a school, you
yeah,
give away a bit. You give away your control a little bit. There's some risk there of it not being a good fit. So maybe the matchmaking mostly works for like extended internships, like a 1-year period, perhaps not for a 4-year project or a 4-year education. Sorry.
right. Yeah.
Because I've never been at one company 4 years or longer.
Sounds
I
about right.
think yeah,
That seems like the industry
I
standard.
yeah, I mean that's what I mean. Like, it's not because there's always fighting and brawling going on, but just because it's less common these days. Like, startups go under, companies get acquired, budgets run out, that kind of stuff. So perhaps the university matchmaking is mostly for a 12-month maximum.
Yeah.
Or maybe or that's something you could also do with that 70-30 split, where you have a extended period at a company, then you have a learning moment in school, let's say 3 months, and then you go for another 12-month period to a new company. Switch things around.
That's actually a good idea.
Might be something.
Because also if you pick an industry that you think you like, you have an opportunity to, let's say you get an opportunity to intern at 3 different companies, you would pick 3 different industries. Like,
Yeah.
who's to say working at Facebook or Instagram that you would like it? Maybe you're more apt for like a government job. Maybe you're the one person who likes that. So being able to kind of dip your toes in like maybe different industries to kind of see, like, just to make experimentation there. Like, you don't have to love the first industry that you picked.
Yeah, and it's never going to be the way you think it's going to be by just looking at the company's website. Like, I've spent over a year at a company where I didn't even want to apply, because I just didn't think, well, they sent me a message. I looked at their website. I was like, no, it's not for me. Then I went on their call anyway, and I had a wonderful connection with the person I was speaking to. Like, felt like we were best friends from the first minute, that type of connection. So that was a positive, unexpected change. And then also I have done some government work where I was very happy. And then the other way around has happened too, where I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. And after a month, I was like, help, take me away. So with that in mind, I think it's good to have multiple of these matchmaking moments during your entire education period.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think we might have solved it.
Yeah.
Now, the next step, start our own school, start the matchmaking process.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's getting very close to us becoming recruiters.
True. That's an interesting avenue.
Yeah.
Not to say that I'd like to take it, but that's interesting. Follows the same line.
Yeah.
I imagine you have to yeah?
Yeah.
What's stopping you?
Being too busy with design work. But every now and then I get a question like, hey, do you know someone?
Yes.
And then I can post on social media like, hey, yeah, I know someone. And then you get a few replies and then you just forward them, but there's no curation there. But I feel like I've been in design long enough to be able to curate if something's going to be a right fit, yes or no, and then you can ask money for it. But I just don't have the time and energy to start yet another experiment. So that's what I wanted to say. What did you want to say? Because we started being happy and shouting things at the same time.
No, I was gonna say, but you answered it that like if you're a recruiter, I imagine it would be beneficial to have worked in the industry for a while. I can't imagine that you jump into the recruiting space and not being a technical person. If you're, let's say you're hiring for like all roles, so PMs, engineers, and designers. I imagine you'd have it'd be beneficial to have been one first and then start the recruiting to have a better tell.
Yeah, I'm not sure about you, but I get phone calls and messages from recruiters every now and then. Like it feels like just based on the number of calls I get, it feels like the market is picking up again. But what I wanted to say is that you notice right away if the recruiter you're talking to is or has a design background, yes or no. And I always feel I'm more likely to be open when I notice that the recruiter is quote unquote one of us,
Yes.
Because I feel like, then you can speak more freely. You can just mention your UX terms, your keywords and all the things that they will then understand because they are or have been a designer. When I speak to a non-designer recruiter, most of the conversation is me explaining what I do, and then I can hear them go through the list of requirements.
Yes. Have you used Sketch or Figma or the Adobe suite?
Yeah. Pixels, right? Yeah. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. I mean, I think that's would be a great episode, and that's something we can now add to our episode automation system. That we should have a recruiter mastermind super episode where we just talk about you're a designer and here's how to successfully work with recruiters, and then also the other way around, you're a recruiter and here's how to successfully work with designers.
I like it.
I will put it in our channel, and then it gets automated and put into the right places all the time, all on its own.
Well, we should speak more about your automation wizardry, but maybe that's for another episode. You're killing it.
Well, that's something I've been thinking about when we're talking now. I think it's quite relevant for our education talk that we're having right now, is that I think it would be super smart for schools, teachers, also students and designers to be very open and to listen and view a lot of content online outside of your bubble, and really have a strong filter. Like, do not listen to the UX is dead type people, game changer, exclamation point. But there are some rather silent or less shouting experts. And the whole automation stuff I learned by following an automation expert about Zapier and all that kind of stuff. And then you will notice at some point some patterns like, hey, they all talk about this thing. Let's try it out. Oh, that's quite useful, but I'm not sure how yet. Then you park it. And at some point you run into something where you're like, this guy talked about Zapier. You can connect things and automate things. Now I'm posting a video every 2 weeks. Maybe I can blah, blah, blah. And the ball starts rolling. I think that's a smart thing to do because you will figure out new things that way. And automation wizardry, as you call it, is one of my favorite things to do. And just because I learned it a little bit, I'm not an expert at all, but it does help me by freeing up more design time.
There you go.
The subscribe to this show page that I showed you before this recording, I was able to put an hour of my time in it today because, well, in part because some things I do are now automated, so otherwise it would have been evening work or weekend work. And realistically speaking, would have been, I'll do this at some point, but I'll actually never do it type work,
Yeah, exactly. In the
End
never
of
do it
rent.
bucket.
Yeah. It's the gray zone of how do you call it? The dead zone of priority. Like, it's kind of important, but there's always that one thing that's slightly more important. And then that thing will always be the number 2 on your list, but you're never going to get to it. I don't
I
want
have a
to.
bunch. I have a bunch of those. Trust me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we all do. But I don't want to end this episode on that type of sad note. I don't think that's our vibe. The thing that we want to do. Maybe as a final question, like, remember that the thing I mentioned earlier. Like, I've done my boot camp. Now what? What would you say? Do you have like one super important thing that everyone must do at that point?
Yeah, I think it goes like, it's a simple one. Whatever you learn, apply it, because learning a bunch of theory gets you nowhere unless you apply it. And also, once you've graduated or finished your education, it's never finished. It's a constant learning battle. So be prepared to do a lot more learning, not just on the job, but also outside the job. The best designers I've seen are constantly learning. To your point, you're learning automation, like taking courses, getting mentorship, especially, is super important. So learning doesn't end when you graduate.
That's true. Yeah. And then I like that. I would have probably said the same thing, but just to not repeat you and have a second thing to add to the list, I would say that what I would do at the same time is learn from other people. And you can do so by being bold and just send a message to someone like, hey, you're working at this company. I've been following the company and I think it's very interesting and I'm just curious to learn. Can you tell me a bit more about it? Some people will ignore you, but those who won't ignore you, they will send you a video or a blog post or invite you for a virtual coffee. And then once they do, I would always ask at the end, like, hey, who else should I talk to? And then they're most likely they're very happy to mention one or two more people, that you can also talk to. And then 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, etc. You really build your list of connections that way, and then ask a ton of questions when you can, because then you will learn from them. I think that's a good thing to do, in addition to what you said.
That's solid advice, yeah. And also, it's transferable. If you do a job for a client, ask him, do you have any recommendations for anyone else in your network? It's a transferable skill.
Yeah, just one example that happened over the weekend and yesterday is someone I've been following for months, perhaps even a year. We talk every now and then in exactly the same way as I recommended, just sending a message, hey, how are you doing? I think that's interesting. Here's my advice, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to do a branding design project for his company now.
Nice.
And he remembered me from a few messages we did months ago. So it's a long-term play. Like, if you need a job today, this week, that's probably not the thing to invest your time in. But if you know that you will be in school for 2 more years or 6 months or something in between, like a little bit longer, start today, because then, like it happened to me, a few months down the road, something like that might happen. So it's not generic advice. It's something that happens, for me as a freelancer every now and then, that someone just comes back to me like, hey, Nick, I remember you. Let's work together. Yeah. I mean, that's almost a full hour on education.
Yeah.
And I think I'm very happy that the sad pattern I thought I spotted wasn't as severe as I thought. So I'm very grateful for that, and thank you for being the happy note in that dark pattern I found. It's not as bad as I thought, and I'm very hopeful again.
And I think on the lines, as a teaser for the next episode,
So, yeah.
I think on the lines of doing real work or doing actual work to get better, I think we will be going through an exercise together of picking a random challenge and doing some live work together. So working through a particular problem and coming up with a solution. So putting our minds, our working hats on that episode.
That's going to be great. There's something new, like not just talking about a problem, but actually trying to solve a problem, like right there on the spot. That's going to be very interesting. We have a new website, or well, a new page on the website. That's designtablepodcast.com, the one /subscribe. And on that page, you will find links to all the channels that we have, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, but you can also subscribe. But once every 2 weeks, that's a promise. Once every 2 weeks, we will send over a notification when a new episode is about to go live, just to keep you in the loop. So make sure to visit that, designtablepodcast.com/subscribe, and also subscribe and comment on all the platforms that we just mentioned. By the way, we have our first 5-star review on Spotify.
There you go. I didn't see it. I'm going to check it immediately after this call.
Yeah. So, but the first 5-star review on Apple Podcasts is still up for grabs. So, dear listeners, if you feel like being the first one, feel free to do so and let us know. We'll do a shout out.
Perfect. Till next episode.
Yeah, till next episode.
That was a great episode. So if you like this content and want to hear more, please like and subscribe.
Yeah, and if you want to see more, please go to designtablepodcast.com, Spotify, Apple Music, all the big players, and more.